Namaste. Welcome back to our discussion and preparation for the CTET examination paper 2 for social science. हमारे पिछले सेशन में हम प्रीवियस ईयर क्वेश्चन पेपर फरवरी 2026 का सॉल्व कर रहे थे. हमने कुछ क्वेश्चंस देखे और क्या वैरायटी ऑफ क्वेश्चंस आते हैं हमारे सोशल साइंस एग्जाम में, उनका पैटर्न क्या है और कैसे हम अपने करेक्ट आंसर्स उसमें से चूज कर सकते हैं. इन सारी चीज़ों को हमने देखा. Moving on to the next part of this, now we will discuss a few more questions that we were unable to cover in the first session itself. So coming to the first question in front of us. The boundaries of disciplines that make up the social sciences need to be opened up, and a plurality of approaches may be applied to understand a given phenomenon. What is this approach called? So, social science as a discipline itself has a lot of content, a lot of subject areas that it is addressing. But we need to open up these boundaries and have the plurality of approaches which we should be able to apply in order to better understand the various phenomena in social sciences. So, this particular approach will be called what? That is the question here in front of us. First option is bounded knowledge. Option 2 is scientific inquiry. Option 3 is utilitarianism. Option 4 is interdisciplinary thinking. So when you look at these four options, there is only one option which is talking about various disciplines here. So the correct option here would be option 4, interdisciplinary thinking. Interdisciplinary thinking is required for us to have various approaches from various disciplines so that we can understand a particular phenomenon in a better manner. Moving on to the next question. Question: which of the following is foundational logic in the drafting of syllabi of social science? तो जब हम हमारे सोशल साइंस सब्जेक्ट के लिए सिलेबस बना रहे हैं तो हम कौन कौन से फाउंडेशनल लॉजिक्स या फिर प्रिंसिपल्स को यूज करते हैं. द फर्स्ट ऑप्शन हियर इज focusing on utilitarian principle or the aspect. Option 2, developing more instructive textbooks. Option 3, epistemic shift towards patriarchal nationalist frame. And option 4, inclusion of local perception. So whenever we think of what kind of syllabus the social sciences should have, as social science is basically the study of society, of the people that are involved in society, so all these aspects should and must be connected to the local perception. That is why it is very important for us to include the local examples, the local personals in the social sciences so that it becomes more relevant to the child. Hence, the correct answer here would be option 4, that is inclusion of local perception. The next question in front of us is, the concept of a fair trial is an important one while talking about the criminal justice system. To teach this particular concept, you narrate to the students the story of a person who has been accused of theft and what happens thereafter at the police station and later in the court. What pedagogical resource have you used here? So, this is a question related to pedagogy. So, you can see how certain content from social sciences, how they are being transacted in our classroom and what kind of activities the teacher should give. Based on that also we have question. So, now we have to tell if this particular concept of fair trial, the teacher is talking about the criminal justice system. While explaining this, the teacher is narrating a specific story of an individual and what happens in this whole process of criminal justice. So, which of the pedagogical resources is the teacher using here or which principle they are applying, what kind of activity this is, वो हमें बताना है यहाँ पर. तो हमारे पास चार जो ऑप्शन हैं. The first option is case study. Option 2, charts. Option 3, using a political cartoon. And option 4 is survey data. So in this particular example you can see there is a specific individual जिसके बारे में टीचर ने बताया है, एक specific individual की कहानी, उसके experiences को describe किया है. So the teacher is using case study here. So the right answer here would be case study. The next question in front of us is, which of the following should be followed by the teacher in his or her classroom to promote meaningful learning? हमारे क्लासरूम में जो लर्निंग होती है उसका सार्थक अधिगम करने के लिए और उसको बढ़ावा देने के लिए हमें कौन सा इसमें से यूज करना चाहिए? गिविंग इजी टास्क्स टू द स्टूडेंट्स, promoting the culture of quizzing among the students, giving those tasks to the students which are challenging, and giving recall based tasks to the students. हमें एक चीज हमेशा याद रखनी है when it comes to seated examination and also the pedagogy aspects that we are talking about in our various subjects. We will try to avoid memory based and recalling based tasks as much as possible. So you can rule out option 4 immediately here. Option 1 is also very straightforward and not very prompt when it comes to teaching of social sciences. So we will remove the first option, giving easy tasks to the students as well. The second and third options are having some specific aspects to it. One is talking about using culture of quizzing, and the third one is talking about giving the student tasks which are challenging. So if you want to promote meaningful learning, you have to make sure that the tasks that you are giving are not very easy for the students. It has to be challenging for the students. So the correct answer here would be third option, that is giving those tasks to the students which are challenging. Let us move on to the next question. Below are two statements. One of them is an assertion and the other one is a reason. Read them carefully and choose the correct answer with the help of given options. So now this is which type of question? This is an assertion and reason question. So we have to read both of the statements individually and then we have to see whether the reason is actually explaining or reasoning out that the assertion that is given here. So the assertion that is given here is, the study of social science helps the learner in understanding the contemporary society better. Coming to the reason, social science education aims at providing students essential knowledge, skills, and attitude necessary for self-development and also for becoming an effective member of society. So now we have read both the assertion and the reason. Now what we need to make sure is whether these two statements are individually correct and whether the reason is explaining what is said in the first statement. We will go through the statements again. Assertion: the study of social science helps the learners in understanding the contemporary society better. It is true. Coming to the reason, social science education aims at providing students essential knowledge, skills, and attitude necessary for self-development and also for becoming an effective member of the society. So the ultimate aim of teaching social science is basically for us to make our learners a responsible citizen, an effective member of the society. So both of these statements are true and the explanation is correct or the reason is correct for assertion. So now let us move on to the next question. Teaching social science is a option 1 professional activity, option 2 process of transmission of facts, option 3 coaching for memorization and option 4 personal activity. तो ये चारों ऑप्शंस में से हम इजीली कई सारे ऑप्शंस को रिमूव कर सकते हैं एंड फाइनली जो करेक्ट आंसर है उस पे पहुंच सकते हैं. So look at the fourth option, personal activity. Will teaching of social science considered as a personal activity? No, teaching itself is a social act. So fourth option we can easily rule out. Coming to the third one, coaching for memorization. Like we discussed just now that nowhere are we trying to promote memorization. So this particular option also should be ruled out. Process of transmission of facts. Mere transmission of facts will not be enough when we are talking about teaching of social science. So the correct answer here will be option 1, that is professional activity. So teaching social science is a professional activity. The next question is, which of the following pedagogical techniques should be used by teachers for making social science enjoyable for students? Organizing of visits to museum, celebration of social science week, encouraging watching of night sky, sharing large statistical data related to social facts. So, there are various pedagogical techniques and also approaches that the teachers should use in order to make the learning of social science enjoyable and also very interactive and interesting for our students. So, what kind of activities can we actually use? What kind of pedagogical techniques and methods should we be using here? So, they have given us four, A, B, C, D, four pedagogical techniques or ways of actually helping our students learn better when it comes to social sciences. Now, we need to choose which four are actually correct here. But among these four, there is one particular answer or the option that they have given us which we have to discard. So, organization of visits to museum, that is definitely correct because we are encouraging that we should be able to give our students more and more experiences. So, taking them to museum, field visits, this is an important part or a pedagogical technique when it comes to teaching of social science. So, option A has to be there in our correct answer. So if you see, we can now remove the first option, which is having just B, C, D. Coming to the next one, celebration of social science week. It is very important for us to do that so that the students understand the importance of learning this subject. So option B should be there. Coming to C statement, encouraging watching of night sky. There is a lot that the child can learn by experiencing it themselves from their naked eye. So, this particular option is also needed. If you see the next statement, sharing large statistical data related to social facts. Should we be just sharing a lot of data and facts? No. We have to avoid memorization and giving them just bulk data to remember. So, wherever we have option D, we have to rule that option out. So, with that, we will be left with our correct answer, that is A, B, and C in the option 4. So, coming to the next question, below are two statements. Read them carefully and choose the correct answer with the help of given options. So, we need to read both of these statements and tell if they are true or false. The statement 1 in front of us is, meaningful learning in social science is a generative process of storage and retrieval of information. Statement 2, thinking, language, verbal or sign, and doing things are intimately intertwined. So, we realize that when we read these statements, social science cannot be the mere process of retrieval of information from storage. Hence, the statement 1 will be false and the statement 2, it is true. So, the right answer here is statement 1 is false and statement 2 is true. That is our option 3. The next question, below are two statements. Read them carefully and choose the correct answer with the help of given option. The first statement is, in a democratic setup, centralization of power such as the Panchayati Raj system has gained importance. Statement 2, Panchayati Raj system aims at raising the level of participation and involvement of people. Now we have to tell whether these statements are true or false, just like the last question. But the concept that they are discussing here is decentralization, centralization, what happens in a democratic system, and what is the basic role of Panchayati Raj system. So, if you read both of these statements, you will realize that the first statement, it is talking about centralization of power. The whole existence of Panchayati Raj system is so that the power is decentralized, and hence the first statement is false. Panchayati Raj systems definitely aims at raising the levels of participation and involvement of the people. Hence, statement 1 is false and statement 2 is true. So the correct answer here is 3. Moving on to the next part. Now let us look at a little bit on the key principle of democracy, where it is talking about decentralization. So every time we discuss about democracy, when it comes to the seated exam, you have to remember these keywords, that democracy, decentralization, and more involvement of individuals in this particular setup. So the 73rd Constitutional Amendment Act in 1992 gave constitutional status to Panchayati Raj institutions, and they have strengthened the grassroots democracy by promoting local participation in the governance. So this is one of the key points that you need to remember. Now, the next question: the Sabhas in the reign of Pallava, through their subcommittees, performed various works such as irrigation, road, construction, maintenance of local temples, etc. Which of the following child-centered activities can be done to acquaint the students with the nuances of their functioning? So you have to read the question carefully. Here they have tried to include the pedagogy and the content together. There is content from history and also the pedagogical aspects of teaching and learning of social science. Now let us look at the 4 statements that are here in front of us. Description of work division on the school campus. Example of different groups created for classroom management. Getting a real tour of the Sabhas of the reign of Pallava. Getting a tour of the Sabhas of the reign of Pallava through audio visual material. So, how well can you teach this particular topic, and which would be the right way of teaching so that the children can understand the nuances and how the functioning of this whole reign of Pallava was? So when you look at the options, you can easily make out that there is one option which is practically not possible in today's time, which is option C. So if you remove option C, there are only 2 options that are remaining, that is option 3 with A, B and D, and option 4 with A and B. The D option is also very relevant. Whenever we are unable to take the child due to certain problems to the field, we should try to bring in the simulated aspect of it. Audio visual aids will help us to give them that exposure. So the right answer here will be option 3, that is A, B and D. The next part here that we will be discussing is about what these Pallavas have spoken about and how this concept is important. So now we will move on to the next question. To ensure that social science teaching moves away from an excessive emphasis on developmental issues to an understanding of issues related to justice and dignity, there needs to be a shift in focus from utilitarianism to which kind? So, to read the question again, to ensure that social science teaching moves away from an excessive emphasis on developmental issues to an understanding of issues related to justice. These are the keywords here: justice and dignity. There needs to be a shift in focus from utilitarianism to which one? The right answer here will be egalitarianism, where we are trying to talk about giving justice, dignity, and freedom to our learners and also the concepts here in the social science teaching. So the right answer here is option 2. Moving on to the next question. The next question: below are 2 statements. One of them is assertion and the other one is reason. Read them carefully and choose the correct answer with the help of given options. So, the assertion: an important aspect of social science is the possibility of having different shades or at times even diametrically opposite answer. The reason: it is critical for social science teachers to move away from the age old habit of preaching to the pupil. So now we know these two statements individually. So we need to remember whether these two statements are true or false and understand that, and whether the reason that is presented here in front of us is actually explaining the assertion given above. So the right answer here is both of them are true, but the reason is not explaining the assertion. Moving on to the next question. The use of iron in the Indian subcontinent began about 3000 years ago. What task would you give to your students to develop their understanding on such historical episodes? So this is also another question which is talking about teaching of history, the pedagogical aspect of history. So a very specific content that they have selected here is use of iron in this Indian subcontinent began about 3000 years ago. So what task the teacher should give to the students to develop their understanding of this historical episode? So the options that we have here, the four ways that they have mentioned here is reviewing the book What Happened in History written by Gordon Child. B statement, meeting someone from the traditional blacksmith community of your area and gathering information. Option C, visiting a factory under the supervision of a teacher and noting down the process of making iron. And option D, collecting information by visiting any megalithic site located in the Deccan under the supervision of teacher. If you look at these four statements, there is one statement which is talking about passive learning or making students not actually experience something new or not having the exposure to what is being discussed in the class. So that option clearly will not be correct here. So if you remove option A, we will have the right answer with us, that is option 2, B, C and D. All the other statements are correct. They will help us to develop the understanding of this particular historical episode among our learners. So the right answer here is option 2, B, C and D. So all of these three statements will help us to make the understanding of our learners better when it comes to this particular historical concept. Now let us understand a little bit more on this. Every time there is a question on social science pedagogy in seated, there are certain recurring themes. So, history can best be learned through which of the ways is field visit, community interaction, archaeological exploration, observation and investigation, rather than by just reading a text, which is how we eliminated the first option. So, you should remember that constructivist and experiential learning is what NCF and also NCRT textbooks are promoting. Coming to the next question, how will you assess the students through the project of wallpaper? Project of wallpaper is actually a technique of assessment or a way of giving a project based learning so that the children will learn better. So now let us look at the options. Seeing the selection of the subjects by the students, seeing the presentation on the subject matter by the students, asking follow-up questions after the presentation on the topic by the students, and asking follow-up questions before the presentation on the topic by the students. So here we have four statements. So now we have to choose the correct option. How will you actually assess them if you have given them project of a wallpaper? So in this you can clearly remove one option, that is option D, asking follow-up questions before the presentation on the topic. The right answer here will be the first option, A, B and C. This will be followed when it comes to assessing through the project of wallpaper, but we cannot ask follow-up questions before the presentation has actually happened. So that is how this is the correct option here. So the correct option here is option 1, that is A, B and C. So this will help us in assessing the project of wallpaper. What basically is the project of wallpaper? A wallpaper project is a project-based assessment tool in social science where the child is collecting and organizing and then presenting and interpreting information on a particular topic. What we need to remember with keeping the seated examination in mind is this question is talking about continuous and comprehensive evaluation and how it can be done. So the teacher needs to focus more on the process than the product, and also understanding how well the presentation is happening. We should also see the knowledge, skills and creativity rather than only relying on the written tests. So this is what this particular question was talking to us about. Moving on to the next question. Which of the following statements is not true about formative assessments? The main objective of such tests is to make a final judgment about whether students have met the learning goals of the course. So, we know what is formative assessment and what is summative assessment. Formative assessments are those which are done or conducted frequently. What is the intention of doing a formative assessment? It is basically to get feedback on our teaching and also to check on students' progress. The other one is summative assessment, which is usually done at the end of a unit or an year. We are doing this summative assessment in order to provide a judgment, an assessment value to what the child has learned till now. So when we are discussing this particular question, keep these things in mind. So the second statement is, they allow teachers to modify their own teaching strategies through ongoing feedback. They are diagnostic in nature. Formative assessments are a way for teachers to frequently check students' progress in a course. So now, as we discussed in what is formative assessment and what is summative assessment, based on that, you can clearly see there is one option which is not talking about formative assessment. Formative assessment is not the final judgment. It is part of an ongoing process in order to get feedback on our teaching. It is also diagnostic in nature, trying to understand where the students are lacking, what are the areas they are finding difficulty, so that the teacher can focus a little more, give more inputs on those aspects. And also formative assessment is used by the teacher to keep checks on the students. So the right answer here will be option 1, that is, the main objective of such tests is to make a final judgment about whether students have met the learning goals of the course or not. This comes under summative assessment, and that is how it is the wrong answer here. Moving on to the next question. Which of the following is true about testing? So now we are talking about testing. It is not a standard for comparison. It is a ground for admission only. It is not a trial of students' qualities. It is a ground for critical examination. So now we need to tell which of these statements is true about testing. जो हम टेस्ट कंडक्ट करते हैं वो हम क्यों कर रहे हैं उसके बारे में हमें यहाँ पे बताना है. तो यहाँ पे जो हमें ऑप्शंस दिए गए हैं सिर्फ उसे तुलना के लिए यूज़ किया जाता है, कंपेयर करने के लिए यूज़ किया जाता है, या फिर एडमिशन्स कराने हैं उसके लिए यूज़ किया जाता है, या फिर विद्यार्थियों में क्या गुण है उसका परीक्षण नहीं किया जा सकता है इसके थ्रू, या फिर यह आलोचनात्मक परीक्षा का आधार है. It is a ground for critical examination. So the right answer here is option 4, because this testing will tell us the areas that we need to work on as well. That is why this is the correct option here. Moving on to the next question. Below are two statements. Read them carefully and choose the correct answer with the help of given option. Statement 1. Learning is a continuous process. Statement 2. Learning cannot take place outside the school premises. So we know that learning is an ongoing process, it is a continuous process. It starts from the very birth itself, and we keep learning until our last breath. So, the second statement, learning cannot take place outside the school premises. Now, we have to tell which of these statements is true and which is false, whether both are true or both are false. So, when you read the second statement, you can understand that the whole idea of constructivism, the whole idea of what our NCERT textbooks are based on is questioned here. Learning cannot take place outside the classroom is false, because everywhere we go, the whole of the school and the society as such is actually leading to a child's learning and development. It is not just limited to the classroom or the school premises. We can learn outside. We are learning outside the school premises as well. That is why the correct answer here will be statement 1 is true, but statement 2 is false, which is the option 2. Moving on to the next question. Below are two statements. One of them is assertion and the other is reason. Read them carefully and choose the correct answer with the help of given option. So the assertion given here is testing has a diagnostic function to indicate the presence or absence of a characteristic. Reason, testing is an event or a situation that comprises a set of questions or problems that analyze a person's quality of learning or determine his knowledge, abilities, etc. So now if you see, both of these statements are true, because testing is having a diagnostic function, and also testing is considered as an event which will analyze, which will help us to analyze a person's quality of learning and also determine his or her knowledge and abilities. So the right option here will be option 4, that is both assertion and reason are true and the reason is the correct explanation for the given assertion. Moving on to the next question that we have in front of us. Below are two statements. Read them carefully and choose the correct answer with the help of given options. Statement 1. In school education, paper pencil tests are the only way of testing the learners. The statement 2. During the testing in schools, values or numbers are assigned to represent that the learner has performed. If you see both of these statements and what is asked here, we need to tell whether these statements are true or false. So the very first statement, it is restricting testing only to paper and pencil test, which is completely ignoring the concept of continuous and comprehensive evaluation and various ways with which we do assessment. Therefore, the first statement is false. Coming to the second statement, during the testing in schools, values or numbers are assigned to represent that the learner has performed. This particular statement is true. So the right answer here is option 3. Statement 1 is false, but statement 2 is true. And if you try to understand the concept of assessment and some of the key terms that are present in our CTET examination, so I have listed some of the concepts and its meaning just with the keywords for us to quickly understand. So you need to remember that CTET generally favors multiple and diverse assessment techniques rather than relying solely on paper and pencil test. So whenever these kind of question comes, this is something that you need to remember. So basically the concept of test, what it is trying to mean or measure is, it is a tool used to collect evidence of learning. Measurement means assigning numbers, marks or scores to what the children have learned. And the assessment is gathering information about learning using various methods. And evaluation is when you are making the judgment based on the data that you have collected based on the assessment of the learners. So these are some of the important concepts and their meanings that you need to remember. The next question is, a place where documents and manuscripts are stored, and today all national and state governments have them, to keep all their old official records and transactions is called. So if you see the options that they have given us here is library, parliament, an archive, and a secretariat. So when you see all of these four options, we can easily rule out two options, option 2 and option 4. Now we are left with library and an archive. Library is basically a place where we keep books, and it is meant for everyone else to also access it and read and have the shared knowledge. But it is not used for storing of information. So the correct answer here will be option 3, that is the archives. Moving on to the next question. Which of the following statements related to Tamil region is wrong? Movendar is a Tamil word meaning three chiefs used for heads of three ruling families. The three ruling families were the Cholas, Cheras, and the Pandyas. Each of the three chiefs had three centers of power. Sangam poem mentioned the Movendar. So, when we are looking at this particular question, it is a very specific question that is talking about the history of the Tamil region. Here, the second option is correct. And also, each of the three chiefs had three centers of power. Sangam poems mention the Movendar. So, here the Sangam poems do talk about this. And option 2 is also correct. So now when you look at this, the option 3 is the right answer because we are trying to talk about what is wrong. Each of these three chiefs did not have three centers of power. There were three ruling families, but the center of power was not three. So we had to identify the wrong statement. So the correct answer here is option 3. Moving on to the next question. The next question is an assertion. The relationship between the state and religion may be a bone of contention in today's Indian polity, but history presents workable solutions. Choose the appropriate reason or reasons for the above assertion. So now they have given us an assertion, which is the statement that I just read, and now we have to tell what is an appropriate reason for this. So the statements are: temples were often central to the economy and society. Second one, the town of Ramdaspur had developed around the central Gurudwara called Harmandir Sahib. The third one, Sufis were Muslims, mystics who rejected outward religiosity and emphasized compassion for all fellow human beings. History is about the battles between different states and religions. So when you look at all of these, you can understand that when they are talking about that in the history, there were always workable solutions when it comes to the state and religion. This bone of contention was not prominent then. So there is only one option which is talking otherwise, which is option D, the statement D. So if you remove the statement D, we are having the right answer with us, that is option 4, A, B, and C. So all of these three statements are the reason for the above assertion. So this is also another kind of question that comes. Now you have multiple reasons. You have to choose and see if these three are explaining the assertion that is given to us or not. So this is also another kind of question that comes in a seated examination. Moving on to the next question in front of us. Unusual for the 12th century, Kalhana used a variety of sources. Unlike the writers of Prashasti, he was often critical about rulers and their practices. His sources included, so it is specifically talking about Kalhana. So, when he was writing, what kind of sources he has used? What are the various sources that he included in his writings in order to be critical about the rulers and their practice, unlike the other writers of Prahastis? The options are earlier histories and eyewitness accounts, earlier histories, eyewitness accounts and documents, earlier histories, eyewitness accounts, documents and inscriptions, earlier histories. So, Kalhana was very critical about the work that the rulers were doing and the kind of practices they were following there. So, the sources included earlier histories, eyewitness accounts, documents, and inscription. Therefore, the correct answer here is option 3. If we need to look into this further, we need to understand what and who Kalhana was and what kind of sources he referred to for understanding history better. Kalhana was a 12th century historian and the author of the famous Sanskrit work Rajatarangini, a historical chronicle of the kings of Kashmir. So, some of the important points that you need to remember is that he used to not write like the other writers of that time who glorified the kings. He always cross checked his information, used multiple sources, and was ready and willing to criticize the ruler when and where it was necessary. So, for you to remember, you can remember that he always referred to a wide variety of sources, which includes earlier historical works and chronicles, eyewitness accounts, official documents and records, and also inscriptions. So, this is how we can understand his work. The next question is, which of the following are true with regard to the Marathas? Shivaji carved out a stable kingdom with the support of powerful warrior families. Powerful warrior families were called the Deshmukhs. Highly mobile peasants, pastoralists were the backbone of the Maratha army. Highly mobile peasant pastoralists were called Kunbis. So, now when you read all of these four statements, you realize that this particular concept that they have asked in the question is about the Marathas and their rule and how they were surviving, who were the part of their army, and how they have ruled for a very long time. So, to answer this particular question, you need to remember all the major events that have happened in their time. The right answer here is option 2. All of these statements are true. A, B, C and D. So the right answer here is option 2. Moving on to the next question. So the right option here is option 2, that is A, B, C and D. Now, to understand the Maratha kingdom, Shivaji founded the Maratha kingdom and the Deshmukhs were powerful local warriors, land-holding families. Kunbis was the name given to the peasant cultivators who formed an important social base for the Marathas. And the Maratha army was known for its mobility and guerrilla warfare tactics. When it comes to this, we need to remember for our seated examination a few keywords is Deshmukh families, which were the warriors, and the Kunbis was the name given to the peasants and the cultivators who were associated with the Maratha army. Moving on to the next question. Historical claim: the Ahom built a large state. Choose the appropriate evidences for the above claim. So now there is an historical claim. This is a different kind of question that we are coming across. So now there is a historical claim based on one of the concepts in our history textbooks, which is about the Ahom. The Ahom built a large states. Now, when we are trying to talk about this particular historical claim, what appropriate evidences do we have to support this particular claim? Now let us look at the statements that are given here. The Ahoms were firearms to build a large state. The Ahoms made high quality gunpowder and cannons. The first statement and the second statement are very close. They're talking about the use of firearms to build large state and they're talking about high quality gunpowder and cannons in order to establish themselves. The third statement is the Ahom state depended upon forced labor. And the fourth option that you see in front of you is in 1662, the Ahoms defeated the Mughals. This particular statement is wrong. It was not in 1662. At this time, the Ahoms had not defeated the Mughals. The right answer here will be option 4, A, B, and C. So these three claims are supporting the historical claim. These three evidences are supporting the historical claim that we have in front of us. Let us know a little bit more on this. So basically, the Ahom built a large state. They also had firearms and they built a lot of high quality gunpowder and cannons which they were using in order to protect their state. So now let us know a little bit more and some of the important facts that we should remember for our CTET examination is the Ahoms have ruled Assam for nearly 600 years. They used firearms, cannons and gunpowder. They also followed a system of compulsory labor service which is called the PYQ system. Mir Julma, he defeated the Ahoms in 1662. So the question that we had in front of us in the last option, that is why it was wrong. Okay. So now we will move on to the next question. State the validity of the following on peasant revolts. So now this is another concept from our history. So this is about the peasant revolts. The assertion is those who are oppressed do not always rise up in rebellion. They do so only at times. The reason is in 1859, the Indigo riots felt that they had the support of the local zamindars against the planters. The conclusion that is brought out from this is women turned up to fight with pots, pans, and kitchen implements. So, if you see, this is a different kind of question that they have asked here. And the level of difficulty is slightly more because now we have assertion, we have a reason, and we also have a conclusion. But what you need to remember is read all these three statements separately. First, try to see whether they are valid individually or not. Because if you look at the options, that is what they have asked us, whether these statements are valid or not. So when you read, you will realize that those people who were oppressed do not always rise up in rebellion. This is true. They do so only at times. The reason of it is in 1859, the Indigo riots, it felt that they had the support of the local zamindar when it was against the planters. And women participated in the riots and they used anything that was available to them from their kitchens in order to be a part of this. So, the correct answer here will be option 4, assertion, reason and conclusion all are valid. Moving on to the next question. The following are some facts related to company policies during the second half of the 18th century. Artisans started deserting villages. Statement 2. The company purchased goods in India by gold and silver. Statement 3. The revenue collected in Bengal could finance the purchase of goods. And statement 4. The company became the diwan. So now the question what it is expecting is to arrange the sequence as to how things had occurred in the history. So in the 18th century when the company was there, what policies in the second half of 18th century and how they have occurred with the timeline is what they are asking here. So if you read carefully and try to remember how company has established themselves here, earlier they were bringing in money from their own country and purchasing goods here. But slowly they stopped doing that and were able to finance themselves here directly by collecting revenues. So we now need to arrange these in the right sequence. So how you can arrange it better is trying to remember which particular instance occurred first. The right answer here is option 4, B. the company purchased goods in India by gold and silver. Like I said, they were using their gold and silver in order to purchase goods in India. Then what has happened here is, then they have become the divans. After becoming the divans, they have started collecting the revenues in Bengal and were able to finance the purchase of goods through the revenue that was collected. And because of all this, the artisans, they had started deserting the villages. So the correct sequence would be BDCA, that is in the option 4. Moving on to the next question. And also, for us to understand what the company did and in what order these things have happened, we can look a little bit more into some of the important things that we need to remember. So, in our history textbooks, they have clearly mentioned the state of events that have occurred and how company came into power. Some of the important points I have put forward here. So, for us to remember well, company buys goods using gold and silver. Then they have received the Diwani rights in 1765, and then they started collecting revenues in Bengal. And because of the exploitation, many weavers and artisans have left. A very common question that usually is asked in a seated examination is, why did the company stop bringing gold and silver from Britain? As to what changed? Because of the company obtaining the Diwani status, it used Indian revenue to finance its purchases in India. They need not bring in money or gold and silver from Britain anymore. So this is something that you can remember, and this is from concept of history, that is from trade to territory. The next question here is, which of the following institutional development were direct outcomes of the Woods Dispatch? So now let us see all the 4 statements. So Woods Dispatch, if you realize, is called the Magna Carta of the education system. Woods Dispatch, it spoke about some of the major improvements in the education system. And let us see what are the 4 statements in front of us. Education departments of the government were set up in provinces. Centralization of education under the Governor General took place. Steps were taken to establish a system of university education. Indian civil service colleges were set up in England. Now, if you read all these 4 statements, there are various committees and commissions who have spoken about it. Woods Dispatch has mainly not spoken about all of these. Some of it, yes. Now, we need to see which are the statements which the Woods Dispatch has spoken about. And the options that they have given us is 2 of the above, 3 of the above statements or recommendation was from Woods Dispatch. Are all of these statements a result of Woods Dispatch, or one of these statements is the result of Woods Dispatch? One more thing that I would like to highlight here is centralization of education under the Governor General took place. This did not happen. They were trying to avoid centralization and were also wanting to have some amount of decentralization in order that the masses can also get educated. So the right answer here is option 1. 2 of the above statements are correct. They have spoken about establishing education departments, and they have also taken steps in order to have the university education. Moving on to the next question. Who amongst the following argued that before Aryan rule there existed a golden age, when warrior peasants tilled the land and ruled the Maratha countryside in just and fair ways? So, this particular statement or argument was given by who is what they are asking. So, we have names of very many social reformers here: Rajaram Mohan Roy, Periyar, Jyotirao Phule, and Guru Nanak. The right answer here is Jyotirao Phule. He has spoken a lot about the peasants and related to agricultural involvement of people and how they can all exist in the Maratha countryside and how it was all very peaceful before the Aryan rule came in. So, this is what you need to remember when it comes to the question that we had in front of us. Now, the next question is, Consider the following statements on non-Brahmin movement. The statements are: the movement came from non-Brahmin castes that had acquired access to education. The movement argued that the Aryans were the indigenous races. The movement came from non-Brahmin castes with wealth and influence. When you see all of these statements, you can clearly rule out certain statements, and let us now look at the correct options. We need to tell which of these statements are valid. Only B and C are valid. Only statement C is valid. Only B is valid, and only A and C are valid. So here, when you clearly can read and make out that only statement A and C are valid, never were the Aryans the indigenous races. This was never something that the non-Brahmin movement has argued about. Now, let us move on to the next aspect to understand what actually is the non-Brahmin movement. So, the key ideas of the non-Brahmin movement are: they have emerged among the educated non-Brahmin groups. They were supported by communities with growing wealth and influence, challenged the Brahminical social dominance. They rejected the idea that Aryans were indigenous, and they advocated social justice and a greater representation in the society. So you need to remember these important aspects, and this is from the Women, Caste and Reform chapter from our NCERT textbook. Another thing which you can try to remember is every time the statement comes about Aryans were indigenous. So you need to remember that Jyotirao Phule or the non-Brahmin movement is usually against it. They are not supporting it. They do not believe that the Aryan were indigenous. So this is something that you can take as a key takeaway in this particular concept. Now, the next question in front of us is: social insecurities in any society result from a sense of alienation. In this context, the Indian national movement was a movement to acknowledge the supremacy of people over the structures of government, to do away with the differences of class, color, and language, to acknowledge the government as being equal to the God. So, if you see, there is one option which we clearly can remove, that is option C, to acknowledge the government as being equal to the God. That will never be the right answer. So, let us again go back to what the question is asking us. Social insecurities in any society, they are a result from a sense of alienation. So in this context, the Indian nationalist movement was a movement which was acknowledging the supremacy of people over the structure of government, and also they wanted to do away with the differences of class, color, and language. So the C option we are removing, the C statement we need to discard. So we have two other statements left with us. So the right answer here is option 2. Both the statement 1 and statement 2 are correct. Moving on to the next question. It was established in Madras, Chennai in 1864. It worked to abolish caste distinctions and promote widow remarriage and women's education. It condemned the superstitions and rituals of Orthodox Hinduism, identified the associated movement or organization. So, when you read this, the key aspects that you need to remember is that it is established in Madras, present day Chennai, in 1864. And what it worked towards, it has worked towards abolishing caste distinctions, and also it has promoted women's education and also widow remarriage. So the options that we have in front of us is the first one, Veda Samaj, second, Vedant Samaj, third one, Theosophical Society, the fourth option, Self-Respect Movement. So when you look at this, we can remember various social reformers who have worked in the same area. But In the options that are given to us, the correct answer here is Ved Samaj. So, let us now look at some of the institutions or movements, and it was led by whom and what was their main function. This also becomes important to understand for us so that we remember these key things, because a lot of the times in the seated examination they have asked about various institution and who have founded it. So now let us look at the movement, that is Veda Samaj, that we were discussing. So the founders are various reformers from Madras and also K. Naidu. The objective was widow remarriage, women's education, and anti caste reforms. The second one, that is Brahma Samaj, it also had similar objectives as the Ved Samaj. Rajaram Mohan Roy is said to be the founder of it, and he was working in the area of religious and social reforms. The next is the Prarthana Samaj. It was started by Atmaram Pandurang, and he was working with the objective of bringing in social reform and women's education. The fourth one, that is the self respect movement, it was brought in or founded by the leader was Periyar, and the objective was anti caste movement, social equality. Another tip that I can discuss here with you when it comes to the seated examination, if you see Madras, 1864, widow remarriage, women's education, and also opposition to the caste system, immediately think of Ved Samaj, because these are the key objectives of Ved Samaj. With this, we have managed to finish all the social science questions of the February 2026 question paper. Now, in the next sessions, we will meet and discuss other previous year question papers. I hope you have understood today what are the various types of questions that we come across in our social science paper in seated paper 2. And how do we tackle these questions? What are some of the concepts which are important? And how you have to remember certain keywords, certain people who actually worked in certain areas. So these are some of the important issues when it comes to discussion on social science concepts and also on social science pedagogy. I will see you in the next session. Thank you.